She didn't know I'd overheard the call. She didn't know I'd encrypted the system's core under an alias. She thought firing me was the end. But 22 minutes later, I sat across from her boss with proof she'd just torched the company's future. My name is Valerie Knox, and for 6 years, I've been the invisible backbone of Nexora Dynamics' medical data infrastructure, 32 years old, single by choice, and utterly devoted to the elegant complexity of secure healthcare systems. My apartment in downtown Denver reflected my life minimal, efficient, with 3 monitors perpetually glowing with code that kept millions of patient records safe. That morning started like any other. Coffee at 6:30 a.m., gym at 7, at my desk by 8:15. The Clarion Health security patch had consumed my last 3 weeks. Not just any patch. This was the kind of update that could make or break our largest client relationship. Every line of code had been tested, retested, then tested again. I'd even dreamed in encryption algorithms. The email arrived at 10:47 a.m. Mandatory meeting, conference room A, 11 a.m., no subject, no context, just Diane Monroe's name glowing like a warning sign in my inbox. Diane Monroe, our new CEO as of 4 months ago, Harvard MBA, 0 technical background, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She'd swept in with promises of dynamic restructuring and agile innovation. What she'd actually brought was chaos dressed in corporate buzzwords. I saved my work, backed up the Clarion patch to my personal encrypted drive, a habit that had saved me more than once, and walked to conference room A. Through the glass walls, I could see Diane already seated, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against a manila folder. Beside her sat someone from HR I'd never seen before. My stomach knew before my brain did. "Valerie, please sit," Diane said, gesturing to the chair across from her, the kind of gesture that wasn't really an invitation. I sat. "I'll get straight to the point," she continued, sliding the folder across the polished table. "As part of our ongoing restructuring initiative, we're eliminating redundancies in the development team. Your position has been identified as non-essential." Non-essential. 6 years of building their entire data processing framework from scratch. Non-essential. "The Clarion deployment is this afternoon," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm the only one who understands the authentication sequence." Diane's smile widened slightly. "Chris Matthews will be handling the deployment. We're confident in his abilities." Chris Matthews, 24 years old, 18 months out of boot camp, and coincidentally the same Chris I'd seen leaving Diane's office at odd hours. The same Chris who'd asked me last week what SQL injection meant. "Chris doesn't know the system," I said. "He's been fully briefed," Diane replied. "Your documentation has been very thorough." My documentation, the documentation I'd been pressured to update for transparency over the past month, Greg Morrison, my direct supervisor, had insisted. Now I understood why. "You have 2 hours to clear your desk," the HR representative finally spoke. "Security will escort you out. Your credentials have already been revoked." Already revoked. They'd locked me out before even telling me. I stood, taking the folder without opening it. I knew what it contained. The standard severance package, the non-disclosure agreement, the non-compete clause, the legal chains meant to keep me quiet and powerless. "One question," I said, pausing at the door. "Who made this decision?" Diane's eyes flickered for just a moment. "These decisions are made at the executive level for the good of the company." I nodded and left, but as I walked back to my desk, I couldn't shake the image of Chris's car in the executive parking lot last Tuesday at 11 p.m., or the way Diane had touched his shoulder during the last all-hands meeting, or how my name had mysteriously disappeared from recent project credits. As I packed my desk into a cardboard box under security's watchful eye, I thought about the authentication sequence Chris would need to run at 3 p.m., the specific order of initialization that wasn't in any documentation because I'd planned to handle it personally, the kind of detail that seemed minor until it wasn't. They thought they were replacing me with someone cheaper, someone more controllable, someone who wouldn't question why critical security protocols were being rushed. They had no idea what they'd just done. The security guard's name was Marcus. I'd fixed his login issues twice last year. Now he couldn't meet my eyes as he watched me pack 6 years into a cardboard box. My coffee mug with the faded "Hello World" joke, The stress ball shaped like a server. Photos from team celebrations back when we actually celebrated things. "I'm sorry, Val," Marcus whispered when no one was looking. "This ain't right." I gave him a small smile. "Just doing your job." But it wasn't just the firing that burned. As I disconnected my personal items, I noticed something on my monitor before it went dark. The latest commit logs. My name absent. Every contribution, every late night, every breakthrough attributed to Nexora DevOps team. 6 years of innovation. Erased with a few keystrokes. Greg Morrison appeared as I was taping the box shut. My former supervisor, looked like he'd swallowed something sour. "Valerie, I want you to know this wasn't my call," he said, loud enough for others to hear. Then, quieter. "The Clarion deployment guide is comprehensive, right? Everything Chris needs." "Everything that's documented," I replied carefully. His face paled slightly. We both knew what that meant. Documentation could never capture the intuition, the edge cases, the feel of a system you'd built from nothing. It was like giving someone a recipe without mentioning the oven temperature. "Maybe you could," he started. "My credentials are revoked," I reminded him. "I couldn't help if I wanted to." The walk to the parking garage felt like a funeral procession. Developers I'd mentored averted their eyes. The receptionist who always saved me the good coffee gave me a sympathetic nod. Even the potted ficus by the elevator seemed to droop in solidarity. In the elevator, my phone buzzed. Sarah from the infrastructure team, WTF Val. "Just heard. This is insane." Then another. "They're giving your projects to Chris, the guy who crashed prod last month." And another. "Diane's lost her mind. Chris can barely write a select statement." I turned off my phone. Their outrage was touching but useless. They still had mortgages to pay, families to feed. They couldn't afford to make waves. The February air hit like a slap when I emerged from the parking garage. Denver's skyline stretched before me, indifferent to my personal catastrophe. I loaded the box into my car, a sensible Honda that had seen me through countless late nights, and sat there for a moment. Engine off. 1,300 hours. 1 p.m. In 2 hours. Chris Matthews would attempt to deploy a security patch that could either protect or expose 23 million patient records. He had my documentation. Sure. But did he know that the encryption keys needed to be rotated in sequence, not parallel? Did he understand that the legacy compatibility layer had to initialize before the new protocols, or the whole thing would default to basic authentication? Did he know that I'd nicknamed that particular quirk the landmine, because one wrong step and boom? Of course not, because some knowledge lived in your fingers. Not in documentation. It lived in the 2 a.m. debugging sessions, in the trial and error, in understanding not just what the code did, but why it did it. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, then recognized the area code. Clarion Health. "Miss Knox, this is David Park from Clarion's Technical Review Board. We've been trying to reach you about this afternoon's deployment." "I no longer work for Nexora," I said carefully. "As of 30 minutes ago." Silence. Then, "I see. That's unfortunate timing. We specifically requested you handle this deployment." "I'm sure Chris Matthews will do fine." I lied. "Who?" David's confusion was genuine. "We've never heard of him. You've been our point of contact for 3 years." I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry, David. It's out of my hands now. This is highly irregular. We have concerns about—" "I'm sorry," I repeated. "You'll need to contact Nexora directly." I hung up. Let them sort it out. Let Diane explain to a $20 billion client why their trusted engineer had been replaced hours before a critical deployment. As I drove home, I thought about the code Chris would soon be staring at. The elegant, deceptive simplicity of it. How easy it would be to assume the initialization order didn't matter. How natural to run things in parallel to save time. How catastrophic that assumption would be. They'd taken my job, erased my name, handed my work to someone who couldn't tell a hash from a heap. They thought I was replaceable, redundant, non-essential. They were about to learn exactly how essential I'd been. My apartment welcomed me with the familiar hum of cooling fans. 3 monitors sleeping, waiting. I set the cardboard box on the kitchen counter and went straight to my home office. Not the company laptop they'd confiscated my real setup, the one where I'd been building something they never knew existed. Lumengate. The folder icon stared back at me, innocuous and powerful. 4 years of nights and weekends condensed into elegant code. It had started as a learning exercise, a way to stay sharp. What if I built Nexora's system from scratch? But better, the kind of question that keeps engineers awake at 3 a.m. I opened the repository. 40,000 lines of code. Meticulously organized, every function Nexora's system had, but cleaner, more secure, and completely, legally mine. No company IP, no borrowed code. I'd been careful, paranoid, even, every algorithm re-implemented from first principles, every solution approached from a different angle. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd just fired the person who held 2 versions of their critical infrastructure, theirs and a better one. I pulled up the architecture diagrams, comparing them side by side. Nexora's system, a patchwork of quick fixes and technical debt accumulated over years. Secure enough, but brittle, like a house of cards that stayed standing because no one dared breathe near it. Lumengate built with every hard-learned lesson incorporated from the start. The authentication sequence that Chris would struggle with automated with safeguards. The encryption key rotation, foolproof. The legacy compatibility layer, eliminated entirely through elegant backward compatibility. My phone buzzed. Sarah again. Chris is freaking out. Can't find the deployment keys. Of course he couldn't. They were in my personal key pass, not the company vault. I'd meant to transfer them this afternoon, after the deployment. Standard security practice: never put all your keys in one basket. Another text. He's asking if you left notes about something called the landmine. I almost laughed. The landmine. My private nickname for the initialization sequence bug. The one I discovered 3 months ago but hadn't fixed because it would require a major refactor. The one I'd planned to handle manually during every deployment until we had time to address it properly. The one that, if triggered, would create a silent vulnerability. No alerts, no logs, just a wide-open door in the encryption layer that would look, to all monitoring systems, like everything was fine. I checked the time. 2:23 p.m., 37 minutes until deployment. My computer chimed. An encrypted message on my personal server, from Jake Martinez, a security researcher I'd met at DEF CON last year, now working at I had to read it twice Clarion Health. Val, heard about Nexora, also heard our tech board is nervous about this afternoon. Coffee. Jake wasn't just offering sympathy, he was at Clarion, the client whose 23 million patient records were about to be protected or exposed by someone who didn't know what a SQL injection was. I typed back, "Can't discuss Nexora business, NDA." His response was immediate. Not asking about Nexora, asking about Lumengate. David Park mentioned you might have alternative solutions. I stared at the screen. David Park. From the technical review board. Who'd called me an hour ago? Who knew I'd been building something on the side because I'd mentioned it, briefly, at a conference last year, before Diane, before Chris, when I still believed Nexora valued innovation. That's my personal project, I typed. Exactly. Personal, not Nexora's. Funny how that works. 2:31 p.m. 29 minutes until Chris attempted something he didn't understand. Until Nexora learned that some knowledge couldn't be transferred in a 2-week documentation sprint. Until 23 million people's medical histories hung in the balance of a junior developer's guesswork. I opened a new terminal window. Lumengate's deployment script waited patiently. One command to spin up a demo environment, another to run the full security audit, a third to generate a comparison report showing exactly how it handled every scenario Nexora's system did, but better. They'd taken my job, erased my contributions, handed my work to someone who'd probably Google encryption key rotation while the deployment was running. But they'd forgotten one crucial thing. They'd fired me. They hadn't hired me. I was free to take meetings, free to demonstrate alternative solutions, free to show Clarion Health that they had options beyond hoping Chris figured out which wire to cut before the bomb went off. I reached for my phone and scrolled to Jake's number. As it rang, I pulled up Lumengate's documentation, the real documentation, the kind that assumed the reader knew what they were doing, but still held their hand through the complex parts. Jake, it's Val. How quickly can you set up that coffee meeting with your technical review board? 2:36 p.m., 24 minutes to change everything. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Sarah's texts came rapid fire. Chris is on Stack Overflow. He's literally copying random answers. Val, this is a disaster. He just asked what order to init the keys. 2:41 p.m. The deployment window would open in 19 minutes. Chris Matthews, the man who'd taken my job, was crowdsourcing critical security deployment steps from strangers on the internet. Another text, this time from Tom in database admin. Chris just asked me what sequential key rotation means. Should I be worried? Yes, Tom, you should be terrified. I'd warned them. Not directly, that would have been unprofessional, but I'd documented every quirk, every edge case, every potential pitfall. What I hadn't documented was the intuition, the feeling in your gut when the initialization sequence ran just a little too quickly, the way the system would hesitate for exactly 3 seconds if the keys were rotated correctly, the subtle signs that meant the difference between secure and catastrophically vulnerable. My laptop showed LumenGate's test environment spinning up, clean, elegant, bulletproof, everything Nexora's system wasn't. In my other monitor, I pulled up the deployment guide I'd written for Chris, 137 pages of meticulous instructions. Page 47, Section 4.3. Initialize authentication keys in sequential order. See Appendix C for correct sequence. Appendix C. Key rotation must occur in the following order: primary, secondary, tertiary, validation, warning, parallel initialization will cause silent failure. I'd even put it in bold, underlined it, added a red box around it. But Chris wouldn't make it to page 47. He'd do what every overconfident junior developer did: skim the summary, jump to the quick start guide, and assume the warnings were for other people. Lesser developers, not someone hand-picked by the CEO herself. 2:48 p.m., Sarah again. He's in the server room, sweating bullets. Greg's there too, looking sick. Of course Greg was there, watching his team's reputation circle the drain because he'd chosen politics over competence, because he'd let Diane convince him that years of expertise could be replaced by youth and enthusiasm and a suspicious willingness to work late hours in the executive suite. I wondered if Chris even knew about the landmine, the initialization bug I'd been manually navigating around for 3 months, the one that would create a perfect vulnerability, not a dramatic crash, not an obvious error, just a silent gap in the encryption layer, the kind of vulnerability that might go unnoticed for days, weeks, until someone realized that 23 million medical records were readable by anyone who knew where to look. My secure phone, the one not connected to any company systems, rang. Jake. Val. Can you be on a Zoom call in 10 minutes? Full technical review board. They want to see LumenGate in action. That's right, when Nexora's deployment starts, I said carefully. What a coincidence, Jake replied, his tone suggesting it was anything but. David Park seems particularly interested in your approach to sequential key rotation. Sequential key rotation. The exact thing Chris was about to botch. I'll send the link, I said. 2:54 p.m. In 6 minutes, Chris would begin a deployment he didn't understand, guided by documentation he hadn't fully read, implementing security protocols he couldn't properly execute. The landmine waited patiently, ready to punish hubris with mathematical precision. I opened a new terminal and began preparing my demonstration. LumenGate's deployment sequence was beautiful in its simplicity. No manual steps, no hidden dependencies, no institutional knowledge required. Just clean, secure, automatic execution. Everything I'd learned from 6 years of fighting Nexora's technical debt, distilled into code that actually worked. My phone buzzed, an unknown number with Nexora's corporate prefix. Valerie. This is Chris Matthews. His voice was high, stressed. I know you don't work here anymore, but I really need... I can't help you, I interrupted. My credentials were revoked, remember. But the deployment guide mentions something about a landmine I don't understand. That's in section 7.2, I said calmly. The mitigation strategy is in the appendix. Which appendix? There are 12. Were there, I'd forgotten how thorough I'd been, how desperately I'd tried to download my brain into documentation, knowing this day might come. I'm sorry, Chris. I have another meeting starting. Good luck. I hung up. 2:59 p.m. Somewhere in Nexora's server room. A junior developer was about to learn why some positions weren't actually redundant, why some people weren't actually replaceable, why experience wasn't just a line on a resume but knowledge written in scar tissue from every system crash, every failed deployment, every 3 a.m. emergency call. The Zoom link arrived. I clicked it, adjusting my camera. Time to show Clarion Health what competence actually looked like. 3 p.m. Showtime. The Zoom window opened to 5 faces arranged in neat video squares. David Park from the Technical Review Board, his expression carefully neutral. Jake Martinez, trying not to smile. 3 other Clarion executives I recognized from quarterly business reviews, including Margaret Walsh, their Chief Information Security Officer. Miss Knox, David began, thank you for meeting with us on such short notice. We understand you're no longer with Nexora as of this morning. That's correct, I confirmed, keeping my voice professional. I'm now available for independent consulting. Margaret leaned forward. We're in a rather unusual situation. Our deployment window with Nexora opened. She checked her watch 45 seconds ago. But we've just received concerning information about potential security vulnerabilities. Through my phone, Sarah's texts continued. He's starting the deployment, followed immediately by, wait, he's doing something wrong. I understand your concerns, I said carefully. While I can't comment on Nexora's current operations, I'd be happy to demonstrate my independent solution LumenGate. Please, David said quickly, too quickly. They knew something was wrong. I shared my screen, bringing up LumenGate's architecture. Clean lines, logical flow, no spaghetti code held together by prayers and production patches. LumenGate is a complete healthcare data management platform built from the ground up with security as the primary concern, I began. Unlike legacy systems that bolt on security as an afterthought, every component here assumes a hostile environment. 3:04 p.m. My phone lit up. Chris just ran the keys in parallel. Greg is yelling. I continued my demonstration, pulling up the deployment interface. As you can see, the initialization sequence is completely automated. No manual steps, no room for human error. What about sequential key rotation? Margaret asked pointedly. We've been told that's a critical vulnerability point. I smiled slightly. Let me show you. I triggered LumenGate's deployment sequence. The screen filled with elegant progress bars, each step validating before the next began. The system enforces proper sequencing. It's physically impossible to initialize keys in the wrong order. 3:07 p.m. Sarah. Something's wrong. No error messages, but Chris looks terrified. Of course there were no error messages. That was the beautiful horror of the landmine. It failed silently, opening a door it would never report. This is impressive, Jake said, playing his part perfectly. How quickly could this be deployed in a production environment? For a system of Clarion's size, full migration could be complete in 72 hours. Partial deployment for critical systems in under 6. David muted his microphone and turned to speak with someone off camera. Margaret was typing furiously. In the corner of my screen, I saw a new notification, a LinkedIn message from Greg Morrison. Val, please call me. Emergency. I ignored it. David unmuted. Miss Knox, hypothetically speaking, if a deployment were to go wrong, say keys initialized in the wrong order, what would happen? Hypothetically, right. In a properly designed system, you'd get immediate failure and rollback, I explained. But in older architectures, especially those with legacy compatibility layers, you might see what I call a silent vulnerability. The system appears functional, but the encryption layer develops gaps. Margaret's face went pale. Gaps that could expose patient data. Theoretically, yes, but only if someone knew exactly where to look. It's not the kind of thing that shows up in standard security scans. 3:12 p.m. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number, then another, then a text from Tom. Nexora's entire security team just got paged. DEFCON 1. How would someone detect such a vulnerability? Margaret pressed. I pulled up another screen. LumenGate includes continuous integrity monitoring. Watch this. I ran a security audit on my demo environment. Green checkmarks cascaded down the screen. Every encryption layer, every access point, every potential vulnerability monitored in real time. And if we were to engage your services, David said slowly, you could run similar diagnostics on existing systems. There it was, the question they'd been building toward. I offer comprehensive security audits as part of my consulting package. I confirmed. First step in any migration is understanding the current state. 3:15 p.m. Sarah. Chris just ran out of the server room, might have been crying. Jake unmuted. I think we need to make a decision quickly. Our deployment window closes in 15 minutes. Margaret nodded sharply. Miss Knox, we'd like to engage your services immediately. Can you run a security audit on our current connection to Nexora? I'll need written authorization, I said, for liability purposes. Sending now, David typed rapidly. Jake has emergency contract authority. Whatever your standard rate is, double it. We need this handled immediately. 3:18 p.m., the DocuSign notification appeared. I read quickly comprehensive consulting agreement, security audit, potential system migration, my rate, doubled as promised, plus performance bonuses. I signed. Excellent, I said, pulling up my diagnostic tools. Let me begin the security scan. This should take about 3 minutes. 3:20 p.m. As my tools probed Nexora's freshly deployed system, I knew what they would find. A door left wide open, a vulnerability that would never trigger an alarm, the landmine, detonated by ignorance and hubris. Chris Matthews had done exactly what I'd known he would do. He'd taken the shortcut, run the keys in parallel to save time, triggered the bug I'd been protecting them from for months. And in 2 minutes, Clarion Health would see exactly how non-essential I'd really been. The diagnostic results painted a massacre in clean clinical data. Red alerts cascaded down my screen like digital blood, each line another nail in Nexora's coffin. Jesus Christ, Margaret whispered. The vulnerability gaped wide open. 23 million patient records, protected by nothing more than Chris Matthews' optimistic ignorance. My scanner showed exactly how an attacker could walk through the gap, extract data, leave without a trace. The encryption keys hung useless, like guards who'd abandoned their posts. This is... David stopped, searching for words that wouldn't violate any legal agreements. This is catastrophic. The vulnerability is active and exploitable, I confirmed, maintaining professional calm while my former employer burned.